I was assigned the acting officer on Truck 105. We were in the station at the time of the plane crash. My Silverman, Ron Kreisman, and my driver, who's not here, Brian Roach. We heard the impact, and as we were leaving the station, we heard Captain McCoy on engine 101, who said it was possibly around the 14th Street Bridge. We started out that way, and as we got a little bit further past the station, we realized it was the Pentagon.
There was also an incredible amount of symbolism involved. You know, the Pentagon, the seat of power, the military strength of the United States, obviously a target for the terrorists. The personal stories, though, for me, really stick out and really capture the whole spirit of what happened and what we've learned as a nation since then. You interviewed hundreds of people in the course of doing the research. Do any particular stories stick out, or is each kind of significant for the act of bravery or heroism, or just sometimes the simplicity of what these people did that had such enormous impact?
Well, there's so many, and the hardest part was editing down and trying to figure out what we could keep in the book. The initial manuscript was 900 pages long, and this is 400. You can imagine it was twice as thick as this book, and it was painful to have to take out stories of heroism by these firefighters or just resilience and what they did. It was amazing. Chief Cornwell was one of the stories where he just said, "I'm not leaving." Mm-hmm. When ordered out, "I'm not leaving," and just kept going back in again and again and again. And it was very motivating. His firefighters loved him for it beforehand. Mm-hmm. But to go in there and show that kind of resiliency, it's inspiring for all the other firefighters who were there. Ed Hannon, another firefighter who kept going, trying to get in to save people, despite all kinds of obstacles. We just saw so many stories like that. It was really impressive. And not only that, but a certain level of toughness, where Arlington, a small department, stood up for itself and said, "This is our incident, we're running it, we've got it." And people like Bob Gray, who are getting challenged by government officials to how they're supposed to go and do this operation. Mm-hmm. No, we're not going to do it that way. We're running the show. We're going to do it the safest way possible, so no one gets hurt, and then we do this operation effectively.
Right.
And it was just impressive. It could keep going on. Scott McKay, who's head of special operations, did a phenomenal job in working with FEMA search and rescue teams from around the country that arrived, but it was still Arlington that was directing how all the efforts would go, and they all worked together. One firefighter said there were more than enough egos, but they somehow managed to fit them all in the same area.
Right.
And everybody let that down after the first initial day, and all worked together. Nobody told me that the rivalry got in the way once they established the relationship and who was in charge.
Well, that was one of the things that struck me. The tragedy created this sort of equalizing effect where everybody was involved in the same thing. But do you think there's something about the character of firefighters anyway, that their bravery, their courageousness, their heroism, their ability to withstand that kind of calamitous situation just seems to me extraordinary people. Men and women go into that field and they're drawn because it's exciting, but it's also, it seems like it's a sense of duty, of really putting yourself on the line for your community, and in this case, the country.
Right. The thing to remember about when you see firefighters and police officers, the sheriff, none of these people took those jobs because they wanted to get rich. Mm-hmm. They did it because they had a driving interest and want to help. And when push comes to shove and you have that terrible incident, like I said, so many of the firefighters told me as they arrived at the scene, they looked at the burning Pentagon and said, "We're going to die.
Right.
We're dead. We're walking towards the building. There's smoke. There's flame." Andrea Kaiser, who drove Engine 101 with Captain Steve McCoy, said it was the most scared she'd been in her entire life. Mm-hmm. But they still went in.
Right.
They didn't stop. Were there people who were too scared to go? Of course.
Sure.
There was, but everyone we heard in the Arlington County Department, you just can't really explain even how tough it is to go into. This is a war situation. Mm-hmm. Nobody knew how many more planes were coming, how long they were going to be there, how bad the fire was. They just kept going, and that was the police. Corporal Faust from Arlington Police Department actually saw the plane coming into the building. Was the first person to call in that plane down at the Pentagon, followed by Derek Spector, who was the first firefighter at the scene to call it in. Derek Spector acting as captain on a truck. Normally there's 3 guys, or 4. They only had 3. They're the first people to get there.
Right.
He had to call in and explain it on the radio, and you can hear the taped transmissions. him trying to very deliberately explain that he can see the Pentagon and it's been hit. And the more I learned, especially when you went to the Arlington County firehouses, and these guys are like, I think we might have had the biggest and most complicated roof operation in the history of the country in terms of firefighting. And you're like, well, I think they're right. But how do these people not get the recognition for this?
Right.
Now, what happened in New York was so overwhelmingly tragic, and it all happened live on TV. We all saw it. It was easy to forget about the Pentagon. But in itself, if New York hadn't happened, 9/11 would still be that day in American history where the Pentagon got hit. More people killed in Oklahoma City. One of the most recognizable buildings in the entire world struck by a hijacked jetliner. This story would have stood on its own for years. And, the firefighters, so many of them, and other rescuers and police had said, they're glad they got to serve, but they were a little, it was a little painful to know that they seemed to be overlooked in history. And it was a challenge. I had no idea how to write a book when I started this. And it was far more difficult than I imagined, but very satisfying. I'm glad it came out. And my co-author, especially, being a professional journalist, he kept hammering me again and again and again. You need to be proud of this. No errors. Confirm everything.
Right.
Every single person who says this happened, get 2 other sources to say, yeah, that happened. We really worked hard to make sure that not only was it a good story, but it was a very accurate story. And I feel very comfortable and confident that what we wrote is a good reflection of what happened.
Well, it really is an extraordinary story. I mean, I found myself really gripped. I grew up here as well. I was here on 9/11. I was in another federal agency at the time working. So it's one of those events as searing for me today as the Kennedy assassination was in 1963. It's one of those things where you always remember where you were and what you were thinking. So the story certainly is compelling. You've done a wonderful job, you and Rick Newman, in presenting the story, which I think is really about a community coming together and doing something extraordinary in the face of unknown and potential other disasters. That was one of the things significant about that day, is that we didn't know what else was coming.
Right.
And still people were showing up and doing their job and motivated by something, as you said earlier, more than a dental plan or a paycheck. So it's an extraordinary story, one long overdue in coming, and I hope that many people will take a chance and flip through it, because it really is a remarkable and an enlightening and very empowering story. Thank you very much for joining us, and wish you the best.
Thank you for having me today.